which country in the world is teaching Bitcoin as part of their financial literacy? Most school boards around the world don't even teach financial literacy.
It's reversing the brain drain of El Salvador.
By the time Canada adopts Bitcoin in some way, or Europe begins to make headways into Bitcoin, El Salvador will be fully onboarded.
Smaller countries that look now towards America and they're like, okay, America might do something and we are a smaller country, so like we should front run them.
What good is it to have Bitcoin in our country as legal tender if it's the murder capital of the world? We want to be the financial capital of the world, the future financial capital of the world based on a Bitcoin standard. El Salvador was one of the top 5 destinations in terms of growth post-pandemic.
What G7 nation will be the first one to print money to buy Bitcoin? How's the internet in El Salvador? Is it good?
Yeah, it's pretty good actually. Robin, I should say that I'm not in El Salvador right now. This is the public library and where I live in Canada at the moment.
Oh, you're not there.
but-
Okay.
No, I'm not there. But internet connection in El Salvador is perfect. There's some like if you go to the mountains in Chalatenango, there won't be a lot of coverage, but there isn't a lot of people there, so it really doesn't affect many people, and so many people have been getting Starlink nowadays too. So like my cousin lives, he has a beach house or a lake house, and they didn't have any, and he lives on an island there when he goes there. And he got Starlink because there's just no practical way to get an internet connection there. And then as soon as he got it, like basically every neighbor got it. So
it's cool. But you live in El Salvador, or you live in Canada, or in both places, kind of?
kind of like both places. So yeah. So my main job, if you will, my fiat job is here in Canada, and my kids are going to school here in Canada. So I'm here, but the idea is to get down there as soon as they're done going to school, and like my goal is to just retire. I mean, I'm far away from retirement, but like at least have 2 stable homes, one here in Canada and one in El Salvador, especially after the things that we've seen improve in the country. Like that's the goal for many people like me who are kind of in my situation. There's many of us actually, the Salvadoran diaspora, who may have a job in the States or Canada or Australia or Europe, but then we have family and sometimes property and interests in El Salvador. So and our heart's still there.
So you want to move for retirement to El Salvador?
Or even before, like, spend winters down there working remotely, that would be an ideal kind of situation for me.
So the sooner the better, the sooner the more in El Salvador the better.
Yeah, that's right. Like I married a Canadian girl, and so my wife's Canadian, and one of the things that I often talk about is like what when people leave their home, sometimes it's not by choice. Sometimes it is, but immigration sometimes is forced, right? And it's you might be living in the middle of the desert, but that's your home. That's where your network of support is. That's where your family is. And for some people, it'll be like, well, why would you want to live in the desert? Why, or a place that's not palatable to you? But that's your home. That's what you know. That's where family is. And so you're forced to leave for various situations, and then you're forced to leave your family. And I'm kind of finding myself in that situation too, but like the other way around, where I came to Canada when I was a child, and then I set roots here, always thinking I'll go back. I set roots here, my wife's Canadian and my kids are Canadian and they've set roots here. And then for me to now go back to El Salvador, to place where I feel home, I'm also leaving another place where I feel like it's home, and then my kids have known as home, and so it's difficult to leave, right? And so my goal is to try to make it so that they feel like they have both homes, right? And the impossibility before was that we couldn't go to El Salvador and enjoy ourselves because it was too dangerous, and we really couldn't embrace it as a home. And then through the shift and the transformation that the country has undergone, it has allowed us to reconnect, and especially, maybe not so much for me, but definitely for my wife, to begin to love the country, and for my kids, who've always sort of like in their heart been like, oh, I'm Salvadoran, I love the country, but I've never been there, and I know it's dangerous, and now we can transition into a moment where that's now a reality, and then we can begin to make it home, right? And then at a certain point in time, if we have a second home in El Salvador, a place to be, they can go there and they can be just as comfortable as they are in Canada, right? So
It's kind of reversing the brain drain of El
mm-hmm.
Salvador. I heard so many stories already of people that moved away from El Salvador to Canada, America, to Spain, to all kinds of places because they didn't feel home, they didn't feel safe there. And most of them that I talk to now is like, yeah, I'm either already back or thinking of going back or want to go back at some point. So it's just from that standpoint already a success of getting the people that left back, and if Neupukule only achieved that in alone as alone is already a major success in my eyes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, it's quite remarkable what's happening, and I can tell you that I don't think that I ever thought in the past that this is where I would be. I thought maybe like this, like where we are now, my kids would see it, or I would see it in my old age, but it's quite remarkable. So I don't know.
It's interesting also with Neupukale. Perfect. Before we get into El Salvador too deep, I want to touch on, because it just happened this week with America also slowly moving towards Bitcoin, or maybe moving towards Bitcoin. At least the president has now more highly likelihood than Biden to adopt Bitcoin. How did you see that? If you're jumping like Canada and El Salvador, in between is America, if I got the map right.
Yeah, yeah.
uh, how is that part going with America, and how do you see it, those moves that they are making now?
Well, like I think politics in America matters so much for the entire world, even if we think we're disconnected from it. I mean, they are the major power in the world right now, and I think the change in in the presidency, and not only the presidency but the Senate, and it looks like they're going to take Congress as well. Um, I mean, the way that I see it is inconsequential to Bitcoin. It's they have so many other things that as a country they need to tackle, and I think that the rejection of the Democratic Party was pretty solid, especially among those swing states where you need to win those if you're gonna take control of the executive and the Senate and Congress, right? Um, and it what I found interesting was that for so many years we kind of had this notion that the Democratic Party was the party of the people, right? The party of the working class, the party of inclusion. And I think Bernie Sanders, and by the way, there's a lot of Bitcoiners who are former Bernie Sanders Democrats. You'd be surprised. Like there's so many, and how he wrote a letter, and essentially he said, like, this is the Democratic Party's fault. You know, I don't want to sound fatalistic that like that Trump is going to be so bad for the U.S. or the world. It's not. I mean, he had a presidency, and we had the least incidents of geopolitical you know disputes and wars and everything. So you know, but what Bernie Sanders essentially said was like, they turn away from you because you turn away from them. And so, and now the flip the flip side of that coin is that the Republicans have always been the party of the ruling class and the elites, right? Who have for a better part of their existence never really cared about what the average folk in the US is doing, other than let's maybe get the economy going, and what's good for my business and my influence in the Republican Party, so that I can be wealthier, right? And that's fine. I mean, that's how capitalism works, right? But I think the Republican parties at some point lost the support of working class folk, because they really weren't passing laws that benefit people. And I think that this is the lesson, not just for uh, democracy in the U.S., but democracy everywhere. Is like, if you get elected, you have to look after the people who elected you. If you turn away from that, then you're gonna get dispatched, and they're gonna elect somebody else. And I think this is what's maybe a little bit unique about El Salvador, is that I think that for the large part, the government there is trying to do what it set out to do. But before we get too deep into there, I think that in terms of Bitcoin, what's happened in the US is really not what we think is going to happen. I think if they move, they're going to move slowly. They're it's going to be incremental. They can't upend their entire economic and financial system to accommodate Bitcoiners. I think we live in a bit of a fantasy world if we think that the change can be drastic. It's not. It has to be incremental. Like, so much of what exists today depends on that financial system, that it has to be incremental and very thought out, very well thought out, right? You can't just unplug from it. I mean, I think, I mean, some people are of that mindset, and that's fine. I'll personally be okay, but so many people wouldn't be, right? So it would affect so many people if they all of a sudden unplug from the current financial system. But I think that there's some certain things that they can do, like capital gains, things like that. Being able to spend your Bitcoin without incurring that capital gains event, right? Things like and maybe there's a threshold, right? Like under $1,000 or whatever. There's some practical things that you can begin to do, but if it was that significant, we would be at over 100K per coin today, USD. Right, it is over 100K per coin, Canadian, but USD, like if and this is me just giving my opinion. I'm just a regular guy with an opinion, so I'm not an expert. I'm not a financial expert, but I think that, like, if the event of Donald Trump taking power over the presidency was so good for Bitcoin, it would have pumped way more than it has, right? So I think a lot of this was already built in. Like, this is no surprise. I think a lot of us knew that this was the way that it was going to go. You could see it, and so I think the price change was already built into it.
Absolutely, and it's interesting when we talk about America in moving towards Bitcoin. because you're 100% right with the slow incremental moves. But those slow incremental moves have like a massive force. Like if they buy just with like 1% of the yearly revenue Bitcoin, that's like a million Bitcoin if at the current price. Obviously, if they actually do that, Bitcoin price would massively skyrocket, and they would not get there, and they would need to buy way more. So it's a question if they even get to like a million Bitcoin or 2 million Bitcoin, whatever they aim for. I think Robert Kennedy Jr. even wants for a million Bitcoin, which is crazy. But those like small moves for them are like pretty huge steps. Like that's like that's like if a MicroStrategy a medium-sized publicly traded company, I would say, can acquire 250,000 Bitcoin. Think about what America could do with like a small percent of their resources. So you're 100% right that America will not do anything irrational, huge in the next few years. But something like raising capital gains tax and like saying, let's keep the Bitcoin we have and let's buy like a little bit every year. That little bit is that's a huge amount of number. But for me, the bigger thing that happens if now Trump is elected, but he's not yet president. I think that's like January something. Then he probably needs a little bit time, and so like till something actually happens, this takes time. But the bigger thing for me is now, what if like smaller countries that look now towards America and they're like, okay, America might do something, and we are a smaller country, so like we should front run them. Like we should do something now before they do it. Obviously, El Salvador was the most visionary, which moved so early, but that's kind of incredible. Like I did not expect that at all. Like when I moved into Bitcoin in 2020, I had like a timeline for me, and I thought like 2025 I was very bearish. 2025 the first small countries do something. It happened the year after I came into Bitcoin. That surprised me, and now like even 2024 with America, the small moves. But the signal to all the small countries now that haven't explored Bitcoin but really need it because they are maybe dependent on US dollar, and they see also the positive example that El Salvador or Bhutan, however you say Bhutan, I heard it somewhere last time a little bit different, is doing. I think that ripple effect could really be huge and could set up this fear of missing out of a country, of a nation state level, in a huge sense. At least that's what I think the significance of that could be. I mean, yeah, we have to see what was actually happening and if Donald Trump actually does what he said. But his administration has some good people in there, and let's see if he delivers. But the bigger thing is now El Salvador already has those things. Like El Salvador is already delivering in a good sense. So do you have on that final thoughts, and then we can move into El Salvador, how the adoption actually is there?
Yeah, I think that the U.S., even under Biden, is probably doing a lot more behind the scenes that they actually can talk about. I mean, we'd be naive to think that they're not actually, looking at it from all angles, because it's very easy for us to say, oh, they're stupid, they're at the end of the fourth turning, but and it's what we see. We're just seeing the top of the iceberg behind what's happening. I think that there are, you know some people who may be preparing for all possible situations, and if they're not, then we're better off for it because we got a head start on them. But I think that they it's not just the US. I think all major superpowers are kind of in my opinion, quietly following the same recipe that Satoshi um, recommended. That in case it takes off, you might want to get some.
Yeah, and some of them do that with confiscating it, as the US is doing. we always say like, oh yeah, they have Bitcoin. No, they don't. Like they stole Bitcoin from people and they keep them. I don't
Yeah,
know if that's actually having Bitcoin. They stole it. They control it, but yeah, that's, I don't know. I would not say they have Bitcoin, even though yeah they have Bitcoin. It's kind of weird. So now to El Salvador. What is the I'm really pumped because actually, in like, I don't know, 36 hours or 48 hours, something like that, my plane is leaving actually.
you'll be on a
To
flight.
Yeah, I'm
Awesome.
flying to El Salvador. By the way, I'm coming for 2 hours because I have a layover in Canada. So
Nice.
I'm flying from Austria to Canada to El Salvador because that was apparently the best flight to take.
Yes, it is.
And yeah, so I'm soon coming to El Salvador and soon finally can check it out myself. But how is El Salvador's Bitcoin adoption? What are some maybe misconceptions that people have about it, and how is it going from the things that we know?
So, and opinion around Bitcoin adoption in El Salvador varies from like it's a complete failure to like maybe an overly bullish outlook where, adoption is 100%, right? Because and this is true. There is 100% awareness. Everybody in the country knows what Bitcoin is. They may not know how to use it or they may not transact it, but everybody knows. Whereas, even here in Canada and in Austria, the US, there's people who don't have probably never even heard of Bitcoin still. And but that's not the case in El Salvador. But I think, the reality is somewhere in the middle, right? Where uh when Bitcoin became legal tender, I would say that 99% of Salvadorans have not even heard of Bitcoin at that point. And so, how can you expect a population to begin to transact, use, and store their wealth and their savings in Bitcoin when they haven't even heard of it? And so, that there is a process in place, and and I think that that process we have to look at it from the lens of a low time preference, which means that it's not going to happen overnight, even if you put all the policies in place to enable it in the technological infrastructure, and you invite Bitcoin companies to set up shop in El Salvador. There'll still be um, people who won't get it or who won't use it. It is fairly easy to transact in USD, and I mean fiat's easy. You don't have to, especially to spend it, because fiat's there for the sole purpose of you to use it and spend it, right? And whereas Bitcoin right now is at a point in time where people are storing it, right? And people don't want to spend it, and so then in El Salvador you can spend it, but people are still preferring to use the lower form of money, which is fiat, which is the USD. And so, but I think that I'm very hopeful. I'm actually involved with an organization called Mi Primer Bitcoin, which means my first Bitcoin. And it's a group of Bitcoiners, locals as well as expats, that came together and developed a curriculum and a student workbook. It's a 10-week course that teaches people from zero to knowing what Bitcoin is and how to transact it, how to store it in 10 weeks. And this was developed from the ground up. There is no government support. But what has happened is that it's had so much success in teaching young people, high school age students, that now the government has taken that model and implemented it in the public school curriculum, and now even some private schools are teaching it as part of their financial literacy, which is great because which country in the world is teaching Bitcoin as part of their financial literacy? Most school boards around the world don't even teach financial literacy. They teach other things, but not financial literacy, which is one of the most practical things that you'll need in your life. But in El Salvador, Bitcoin's part of that. And from that sense, I think that if we take a low time preference approach, we are setting young people for a better future, and for we're setting them up with the knowledge for success into the future. So by the time Canada adopts Bitcoin in some way, or Europe begins to make headways into Bitcoin, El Salvador will be fully onboarded. Right, this is not going to happen tomorrow, but the things that we're doing today are setting the country up to be successful. And I like it that it's happening in a very decentralized manner. I mean, yes, sure, the government's kind of adopted some of what started from the ground up, from just regular folks trying to gain more knowledge. And so in that sense, I think Bitcoin is going very well, right? So but yeah, I mean, there will be critics, and I'm not one to not listen to the critics. I think we have to listen to the critics, because if you don't listen to the critics, then you can't improve. And so where there is valid criticism and not just shit talking or mudslinging, then you take that and you implement it and you make better, right? Failure is only failure if you don't take the lessons to improve. And I think that's what a lot of these folks down on the ground are doing. They're listening, they're seeing where they can improve, and the curriculum is it's on its second iteration now, and there's going to be a third and a fourth, but it's way better. I've been teaching it here in Canada, and it's so good. People enjoy all of the activities, and what's unique about it is that and this is one of the biggest challenges around understanding Bitcoin, is that people want to understand Bitcoin from the point of view of where it is in the market, what the price of one Bitcoin per year fiat currency is, and how they can invest in it and make money. But really, in order to understand Bitcoin, you need to understand money. And so many people don't understand what money is. And so if you don't understand money, then you're not really going to understand Bitcoin. And the course takes you from understanding what money is to then seeing what the flaws of the current money system are, to then having the need and the urge to move into Bitcoin.
That's super interesting. I love also the approach of like educating the kids, because that's the most effective way to make it sustainable long term. And for me, it's interesting also like how much of the like Bitcoin has different adoptions that it goes through. Like first is like the treasury, where you like exchange your main treasury, which might be stocks, might be US dollar, might be euros, might be whatever it is, to all to Bitcoin. That's what I did on a personal level. I dropped all stocks, everything else that I had, completely all in Bitcoin. The second step is a little bit harder for me because I'm in Austria, because it's the medium of exchange part of like, okay, let's just exchange the value that I have also directly in Bitcoin. Let's get paid in Bitcoin. Let's pay in Bitcoin. The paid in Bitcoin already, I do already have to a certain extent with my sponsors. Actually, like most, a fair amount of my income of the company is now in Bitcoin, which is really cool. But paying in Bitcoin, that's kind of hard. That's the hard part. And the last part would be then you have all your wealth in Bitcoin. Maybe you have a house and stuff like that, but that doesn't count. But all your liquid net worth is in Bitcoin. You exchange everything in Bitcoin. And then the last part of that is you also think in Bitcoin, like you use Bitcoin as your unit of account. So for me, to have 100% Bitcoin adoption would be a country which has all his assets in Bitcoin, all his liquid assets in Bitcoin, has all the unit of accounts in Bitcoin, and uses almost only Bitcoin as a mean exchange, except when tourists come and they have to exchange stuff and stuff like that. Obviously, no country is even close to that. El Salvador is the country that is closest to that. Maybe Nigeria and some other African countries are also coming closer to that. But I think El Salvador is probably the country that is closest to that. How far do you think El Salvador is to that vision? And obviously, you don't have a crystal ball, but if you had to guess, like, when do you think it would be realistic that El Salvador might be eventually there? Like, is that like 20 years out? Is that 200 years out? Obviously, nobody really knows, but do you have from your insight that you have from the country, a rough estimate where like that could, around that time, I could imagine that El Salvador is at that place?
Yeah, it's hard for me to say, but like I think that as long as we're in price discovery mode and the unit of account is not Bitcoin, we're still far away. I think pricing things in Bitcoin and accounting in Bitcoin are really really essential in order for the full Bitcoinization of an economy, right? So, in even in circular economies like Bitcoin Beach, you know, Bitcoin Berlin. I don't know if you're gonna go there, but it's a little town in Usulutan where my dad's from, called Berlin because some of the settlers that went and worked as coffee farmers there were originally from Germany, and so they named it Berlin. But even in those circular economies, people are still off ramping and on ramping back to fiat because at some point somebody doesn't accept Bitcoin for whatever they need, right? So, but circular economies are so important, and as long as we see more and more emerge, and then El Salvador is actually a good example. It began with Bitcoin Beach, then there's Bitcoin Berlin, and then there's Bitcoin Lake over in Guatemala, and if more and more of these Bitcoin circular economies begin to emerge, then you begin to create a network where you don't need to off ramp from a Bitcoin standard. And so I think we're far away from that yet. I would say like 20 years maybe is even a bit of an optimistic um, prediction, but at the same time, like I never foresaw El Salvador's security improvements happen so quickly, even in my wildest dreams. So anything's possible. Like sometimes, when you have either black swan events or you begin to have like that impetus, that momentum that is then in adoption becomes exponential, right? And so, I'm not sure if you're familiar with some of the marketing texts and models around adoption of technology, but you have your innovators, then you have your early adopters, your late adopters, and then your laggards, right? And somewhere between your innovators and your early adopters, you have this chasm, and and it's like this gap that just sometimes takes so long to happen between the people who are like wanting to make this thing happen and the early adopters. And I think that's where we are today, despite all the many positive things happening around Bitcoin, mostly to do with price, to be quite honest right now. But um, we are in that chasm, right? And so we just got to get over that chasm, and whether that chasm is 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, or 200 years, we don't know. But this is also a good thing because it just lets people know that if they're considering Bitcoin, to save and to begin their journey, like you're still in that innovators and or at least the very beginnings of that early adopter stage.
I partnered up with Coin Vigilante. This is the most beautiful Bitcoin timepiece that I ever saw created by anyone. Look at that beauty. I love it so much. Coin Vigilante made a perfect Bitcoin watch. That's the perfect, subtle, elegant way to go out there and show that you are a Bitcoiner. And that watch brand is Bitcoin only. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece, and make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. If you watch or listen to my podcast on a regular basis, I guess you already bought some Bitcoin. And now the most important step is to keep the Bitcoin. Keep them secure in a hardware wallet. My personal recommendation for hardware wallet is the Bitbox. It's super secure. It's simple to set up. It's also a perfect gift for a friend who has still their Bitcoin on an exchange. And you can get a 5% discount with the code Robin at the checkout. Visit bitbox.swiss/Robin to get your Bitbox. And the next step is to really level up your sovereignty as an individual. You have to have the most secure self-custody setup. You have to secure your own devices. You have to protect your privacy. You have to set up an inheritance plan. And depending on where you live, you even want to have a plan B, a citizenship where you can move in case something goes really wrong. And through all those steps, the Bitcoin Way is guiding you through step by step. And if you visit thebitcoinway.com/partners/Robin, you even get a 30-minute free call to find out how you can level up your sovereignty. That's super interesting. I talked in Amsterdam around the future of Bitcoin, and we picked the year 2050, which is a super interesting year because it is now Bitcoin is 15 years old. In 2050 is in 26 years. That's like the whole history of Bitcoin plus 11 years. So a lot of things can happen in that time frame. And it's also interesting how you said with the kids that are learning now Bitcoin in the school. How old are they? 15, 18, 12?
Yeah.
Around,
So they would be from 13 to 19. That's your average high school year age.
Then let's take 15 as like the average of there. If those 15-year-old kids are now learning so much about Bitcoin, they're seeing all the benefits, they see it grow over the next years, and they're now 15. In 2050, that's 26 years from now, then they are 35, 41, if I did the math correct. So they're over 40 then in 26 years from now. I think I have a hard time believing if those kids who learn now this hardcore Bitcoin stuff, if they learn Bitcoin from the ground up and they see Bitcoin rising and shining over 26 years, I think they will be extremely intolerant to anything else than Bitcoin. They think, be like, why should I use anything else? Like, why should I even touch this US dollar coin when I can do it in Bitcoin? And there will be so many shops that the few shops that might resist and say like, I don't like this Bitcoin things. The Bitcoiners will come in there and say like, oh, I want to pay with Bitcoin, or like, hey, what does that cost? And they're like, yeah, that and that, and oh, how can I pay? And they don't accept Bitcoin. They will walk out. They're like,
Hmm.
oh yeah, I will go to the restaurant down the street that accepts Bitcoin because I only have Bitcoin, so I obviously cannot consume anything here. So the merchant adoption and those network effects, I think that's why I said it before. I think it's extremely clever to have education in the school because that's how you make it sustainable. If you don't have the education in the school, education in the for the populace, it gets really hard to really keep the grassroots movement going sustainable. You always fight an uphill battle. But once you have this education, once you have all the podcasts, all the seminars, all the classes, all the books, like everything that is around education that you can have, that's where the real power lies then, because from an educated standpoint, Bitcoin is just the best form of money. So we only have to fight for more education. We don't have to fight for Bitcoin. We just have to fight to educate people on the topic of money and make them aware that there's Bitcoin, because naturally they will tend towards Bitcoin if they are educated and are aware of Bitcoin. So I think it's a very clever move, and I would not be shocked if El Salvador is leading the way and is the first country to come to that future. And it's 2050, maybe a little bit before, maybe a little bit late. Please hold me accountable. I'm already looking forward to the clips in 26 years from now where I'm like, hey, no, it's not still not there. But I don't know.
I, I like that date actually. I like that year 2050. I think that's in yeah, that's probably kind of something to shoot for, right?
And
The real agenda 2050, you know.
and it's interesting because there's this popular saying, you probably heard it: we overestimate what we can do in 1 year, but we underestimate what we can do in 10 years.
Mhm.
And 26 years is 2.6 times as much as 10 years. So,
Yeah,
so that's
yeah.
it's a long freaking time. A lot can happen. Go back 26 years from now. It's actually 1998. It was exactly my birth year. I'm exactly 26 years old. So there, Google was born exactly 26 years from now,
Mhm.
and Google is kind of already slowly dying off again. So a lot of things can happen in that time frame. I think that's the main message that I wanted to get across here to the people, because I think people say like, oh yeah, in 100 years, maybe in 200 years. Nah, I don't think that takes that long.
That's just crazy that Google's that old. Yeah. Now that you say that, I remember when a friend of mine, because I think I was using Yahoo at the time, for search engine, and he said to me, "Well, you should just use Google." And I'm like, "What?" It's like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, "No, it's just like way better search engine." And I went and checked that out, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, this is awesome. This is way better." you know, and that was 26 years ago. Oh my god. Oh, I was worried. Yeah, yeah, crazy.
Yeah, as you can see here, September 27. I know it because I'm September 9th. So
Oh
Google
yeah,
is almost exactly as old as I am.
yeah.
So that's why I remember it that good. Otherwise, I would not know how old
You're a
exactly
little
Google is.
bit older than Google, so that's crazy. Yeah,
I,
but I agree. I think that that is a good year to shoot for, and I think, like, if you think about the things that El Salvador is doing in terms of their laws and how they're setting up their entire economy, the vision was to be the hub for the future economy, and I think they're doing that. Again, it's not apparent because you pass a law here, you pass a law there, and laws are boring. Who's reading them all? But they're all kind of setting themselves up for that Bitcoinized, hyper Bitcoinized future that we envision. And again, like, I think that some of the things that are happening and that they're envisioning, they're not happening as quickly, like as quickly as we want them. Like some people are like, well, where's Bitcoin City? We were promised a Bitcoin City, you know? It's like, well, yeah, and like Rome was not built in one day, and neither will be Bitcoin City. Like, you know, there's so many things that you have to take into consideration, including the displacement of people who actually live there right now, to construct this city, environmental impacts of bringing infrastructure to the flora and fauna of that region. There's so many steps to get to where we are, but what the current government is sort of modeling a lot of what they're doing is around how Singapore went from a crime riddled um, city state in Asia that was predominantly based there, and their economy was predominantly based around fishing, to now the financial capital of Asia, right, and one of the wealthiest countries in the world, right, and and that didn't happen overnight. And Lee Kuan Yew actually implemented some of the very harsh methods that the current Salvadoran government is also implementing. And, you know, and I know that that garners some criticism, but again, you don't get there overnight, and you don't get there by following the recipes of like what has been known to be recommended and not work. And so then, you know, there's several steps to get there. And yeah, hopefully we get there. I mean, that's my hope. That's kind of where, you know, why I'm hoping I can build enough um resources and wealth to be in a place where we all probably want to be, right?
Yeah. And I also want to touch on a little bit of what Bitcoin could do for on not a financial level, but on a society level, like what Bitcoin does with people. And I don't know, in El Salvador, it's probably also hard to 100% say because not everything is contributed to Bitcoin. Like that, there are no more gangs on the streets and stuff like that. That's not entirely up to Bitcoin. Like that's because Nayib Bukele also helped. Like Nayib Bukele did a great job of getting rid of the gangs. It's not we're adopting Bitcoin now, we don't have crimes anymore. So like that's probably not it. But what did you see in like the change in the people? What has Bitcoin brought to El Salvador outside of just we're using a different kind of money now on maybe on a societal front, maybe in individual people's, maybe we even have stories from them.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to challenge that idea a little bit. I think that when we all get into Bitcoin, we all get into it because, oh, you know, we just, there's various reasons, but, you know, generally it's because we want to make sure that our money's being saved in a way that, you know, it doesn't lose spending power. And then we have more than we have today into the future, right? And I think, you know, perhaps that's how El Salvador started. But once, because Bitcoin was adopted in 2021, but the gang problem was still there. It took almost a full year before that problem was well on its way to being addressed. And what happened was, in my opinion, again, these are my opinions. I have no, you know, I do have some sources, but no knowledge from within the decision making corridors in El Salvador. But what I infer from the whole situation was like, well, what good is it to have Bitcoin in our country as legal tender if it's the murder capital of the world? I mean, that just further reinforces the myth, the narrative that Bitcoin is for criminals, right? So Bitcoin changes your mindset, and I think that's kind of where it all began. It's like, what good is it to have this if we are the most dangerous place? If nobody wants to come here, we got to fix this situation so then we can attract the best. Then we can attract foreign direct investment, which is what we need. El Salvador is a very small um, country, and actually, I like to kind of like draw symbolisms around this just for fun. I think that they're pure coincidence, but the country is 21,000 square kilometers, right? 21,000. We have more or less, some say, like, there's various different levels of volcanoes, from like a huge caldera to just like, an inactive volcano. But essentially we have 21 volcanoes in El Salvador, right? Some might I agree 25, others 19, but 21, right? So there's a lot of symbolism around the number 21. But that 21,000 square kilometers is very symbolic because that's not a lot of land. There are states in the United States that are bigger than El Salvador. Okay. And so we can't, we don't have oil. We don't have enough land to produce coffee to compete with Brazil and other super coffee producers. Our coffee is very good. But it's a very niche product that it's very high quality, but there's not enough of it. We no longer produce cacao, maybe just for local consumption. In fact, we have to import our own vegetables and fruits to feed the entire population. There are farms and there are local farmers markets and organic farms, but there's just not enough. So Guatemala and Honduras and Nicaragua export a lot of the food to El Salvador. Our beef, yes, we have local beef producers, but to feed all of our population, we need to import our beef from Nicaragua, which is very good beef, actually. It's pretty good beef. So the reality is that what is our value proposition to the world? So Bitcoin did kind of change our mindsets. We had to really refocus about what we do have to offer to the world. Well, we have beautiful beaches, beautiful volcanoes, beautiful mountains that we can hike up. We have to increase our tourism because, and yes, our tourism doesn't have the infrastructure of, say, Costa Rica or Mexico, but we need to get there. And the very first, in order to do that, is to solve the crime problem. If we want to be the financial capital of the world, the future financial capital of the world based on a Bitcoin standard, and we want our tourism to improve, and perhaps we want entrepreneurship to flourish, because a lot of what was happening before is like, I have this great idea about being an entrepreneur, this great idea, this great product, these great services. As soon as I started, the local gang would know that I have a business and they would come and extort me. And so what is the incentive for me if my margins are getting delivered straight to the local gang that is basically in control of our neighborhood? There's no incentive. So the first step was to fix the security problem, and to fix the security problem, you have to change your mindset, because it's not about like, we'll just throw everybody in jail. And this is one of the biggest misconceptions. First of all, we didn't even have enough jail space. So there's a lot of things that had to take place: reforming laws, empowering the police enforcement, making sure that we got rid of corrupt judges, making sure that the timing upon which, the operation to cleanse the leadership of all these gangs was precise, because you didn't want them to escape or find refuge somewhere else, right? There was like an epic level of planning and execution in order to happen, and that does not happen if you have a fiat mindset. So, all to say that, yes, you're right. it's not all about Bitcoin, but I think changing your mindset sometimes begin with you inquiring about Bitcoin, and then when you find out what it's really all about, it's about not taking shortcuts. It's about doing the hard work, the proof of work, do it, all these concepts reinforce all of the other things that we need to do around in our lives in order to do that, right? So it doesn't make us perfect. Humans are fallible. We're all like, here we are in a podcast lecturing about stuff. There are things that I'm a hypocrite about in my life that I tell people, oh, you should do this, and I'm not even executing on myself. We are fallible, and accepting that fallibility is part of changing that mindset, which means that El Salvador is not perfect, but we're trying to get there. And yeah, I mean, so it's not all about Bitcoin, but it kind of is. I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense, and it's also like like what comes first? Like, do you need the right mindset to adopt Bitcoin, or you got the right mindset with Bitcoin? like this question in my head also, like, how much does Bitcoin change a person, or did because the person was ready for Bitcoin discover like his like there's a lot of questions for me, and it's like I see the Bitcoin community, and there are so many great individuals in there, from like extremely sporty, they are nerding out of diet, they are so focused on being happy, being fulfilled, being with the family, being yeah, healthy, and all those great things, and they are super wise and super pride, and I'm like, wow, that this community is great. What if the whole world is like that? And there's kind of my question, like, is is the community so great because they got Bitcoin and sound money now, or did the great community found together because Bitcoin attracts those great individuals to each to the community, and and then the question is like, what if Bitcoin is the standard across the world, where kind of that's the main thing, is the whole world then like the early Bitcoin community, or is it, was it just the early community because we are like these early pushers, the passionate early revolutionary people? That's kind of where I'm still completely undecided, honestly, on that one.
Mm-hmm.
How you think about that?
Well, money is an innovation, right? Money is a tool. And often, following this Mi Primer Bitcoin diploma, we play this barter game. And in the barter game, we give everybody like a paper bag, paper lunch bag, and we put different items in this lunch bag, and then we put up something on the screen and say, you got to get a list of these items, and you're supposed to barter with it, right? And then people begin to barter, and we give 10 minutes, sort of aligning it to the 10-minute blocks, um, in order to achieve this task. And it's very hard. I don't think I've ever run a workshop where somebody in that first round achieves that task. And then in the second round, we introduce commodity money, which is we use coffee beans instead of co- cacao beans, which actually were used as a form of currency in El Salvador um, under the Maya and the Pipils and the Aztec Empire. So we use coffee to exchange, and then something interesting happens when we follow that same round or that second round of exchange, is that some people get how to price things in coffee beans and how to and they begin to trade in coffee. Others are still wanting to barter, and they're like, oh, like the beans are not worth anything, and it's like no, but the beans. The coffee beans are your money. You can price things in it, and you eliminate the double wants incident by actually pricing things, and then barely anybody has ever come out unless they cooperate and they pull their resources together, which they do this in a peaceful and not coerced manner. Barely anybody does that. And so why I asked the question, what was the difference between the first round and the second round? Some people say like nothing. It's still hard to barter and trade in beans. Other people say, well, it's way easier because I could price things in beans. So some people get it at first and others don't. And what I say to people is like, this is exactly what's happening to Bitcoin right now. There's a better form of money. There's an evolution of the invention to facilitate trade, but we're still defaulting to the old ways. We're not really progressing until somebody shows us, and then we see, oh, this is how you do it, or these are the benefits, of pricing things in coffee beans rather than trying to barter, right? And that's kind of where we are. Where we have this better form of money, but not everybody is using it, right? And so, just going back to your question, and linking it back to this and to these activities that we run, is that I think that uh, I think it's, for me at least, and I could be wrong, is that right now Bitcoin is attracting a certain kind of individual that that is in alignment with so many things that all of us are trying to seek and be inspired by and are driven by, and we all have a common philosophy, which is also weird because, like I said earlier, I find that a lot of Bitcoiners are former Bernie Sanders Democrats. And then you find like some people who are like very libertarian or anarchist. And then you also find very conservative people. And like, how can all these people with so many, like, with different political philosophies actually be in alignment around Bitcoin, and they actually find that what their differences aren't all that great, that they align in so many things. And I think at this point, that's what Bitcoin's doing. At least for me, is that, and meetups are so great because we just had a meetup a couple days ago here in the city that I live here in Canada, and I said to one of our presenters, it's like, isn't it this great? We all get to meet in person and talk about this, and we are all the right kind of crazy that like we feel comfortable talking to each other, and we don't feel uncomfortable saying dumb things or like trying to offend anybody because we just get each other. And I think that's the point where we are at. I think as Bitcoin becomes ubiquitous and it expands, we probably won't see that anymore, but I'm okay with it.
It's interesting. That was a beautiful description, actually, of like what Bitcoin could achieve in the world, and how it could change society. A few more questions I have for El Salvador is, you brought up tourism. And I imagine that tourism is significantly up just from like the Bitcoiners.
Oh yeah.
Talking about it. How are there any statistics of like how much is
Yes.
tourism up, and is like is it also feelable? Like, do you actually feel it when you're in the country that tourism
Yes.
is significantly up?
Yeah, yeah, all of the above. The UN actually has an agency around tourism, and they keep statistics. And I know a lot of people are kind of skeptic about the UN statistics, but I mean, like, but they are what they are, and El Salvador also reports on these numbers, and El Salvador was one of the top 5 destinations in terms of growth post pandemic, and it's been like it's up there with the greatest. Right now, in terms of volume, it's a little different because it's a small country, and you see it. The revenue being generated, it's felt throughout the entire country, and it's visible. You would go to El Salvador pre 2019, and you would not see one North American, one European. You just would not. Now you are there and you see lots of Europeans out about in San Salvador, the streets. You see them hiking, like in like some people are like, "What is this person doing here in the mountains of Chalatenango?" Like they're just, "Oh yeah, we're hiking." You see people from Africa, you see people from Asia. There's El Salvador used to be a hidden gem for surfers, and the entire allure to El Salvador was that you had amazing waves all throughout the year. And only the risk takers, the surfers, those seeking the adrenaline high of surfing would go to El Salvador because you get another dose of high, which is like it's the most dangerous place in the world. To get to these waves, we got to go through like gang territory, pay people off for our safety, and the reward is these amazing waves. Nobody has to do that anymore. Everybody can enjoy the country, and you know what? The adrenaline high is still there, because what you lose is that element of danger for your life, and you gain the friendliness and the warmth of the people that are there trying to genuinely build connection with the tourists and friendships with Bitcoiners, and the new people who have given El Salvador an opportunity. And so, yeah, I mean, it's you can physically see it. It's there, and I don't have any recent stats with me, but I did write a few articles on Bitcoin Magazine that provide those stats. So if you ever want to I think in the first and second year anniversary of El Salvador Bitcoin adoption, I spit some of those stats on those Bitcoin Magazine articles. They're there for you to check out, and I actually I referenced those sources straight to the data that backs it up. So,
Oh, really cool. Thank you so much. One last thing is, when Bitcoin adoption is high, is Nostra adoption also higher than usual in El Salvador?
Nostr is not very well known in El Salvador, and again, like I think Nostr is a level of like sovereignty that a lot of people don't quite understand yet. A lot of people are still relying on centralized social networks and centralized data providers. Um, I think that element of sovereignty is still a bit of a ways away, because, and you know why? It's because it requires um, a level of technical knowledge that a lot of people don't have yet, right? And perhaps even resources, setting up your own node. Most the realities of most Salvadorans, they live, hand to mouth, which means that it is difficult to save in Bitcoin because their needs are we're still a country in recovery from the civil war and the gang warfare, and it means that still a lot of your income is income that you have to use to pay to survive, to pay your day-to-day costs. We are a low GDP per capita country, and so our propensity to spend is higher than our propensity to save, and so I believe that Nostr is facilitated when you have a higher propensity to save, because then you have the time, then you have the resources to invest in a node, invest the time into knowing the technical know-how about storing your data in a sovereign way and not releasing it to these social networks that basically act against your best self-interest by selling your data and selling you crap you don't need with your own data, um but my hope is that as the country grows, as these things uh, develop, and as Bitcoin adoption emerges, then um, this just becomes part of it. And this is kind of where I also feel like, the non-custodial versus custodial solutions in El Salvador can play together. It can't be one or the other. Like, I have no problem telling people just download Blink or Wallet of Satoshi. It is custodial, which means don't put a lot of money on there. But in order to transact and do things day to day, these are great solutions because you don't have to like think about opening up a channel or did with multiple other nodes and manage your channels. Like, it's you don't have to worry about that. It gets you on a Bitcoin standard. Yes, you give up a little bit of your sovereignty, but you begin to begin your journey into Bitcoin, which then will allow you to then step into that next level of sovereignty. So I love Noster. I have to again be fallible in this regard, and and say that I don't use it as much. Having said that, I'm using Twitter or X, whatever, a lot less than I did. I find that like there's just too much noise in there, and it's better for my mental health just to be away from it. And I'm very selective about what I do in social networks now. And so I think unplugging altogether is probably like the best form of sovereignty, if you will. Like, so, and that's actually something you can do in parts of El Salvador is unplug. Like I said, internet connection is amazing, but there's places where you can be away from everything.
Very true. And yeah, Twitter is a big noisy place and very distractive. I try to always like stay away from it, but as I work, like my whole job is like social media and doing the podcast, so for me it's really hard to make that cut. And then you're working something, then you're switching to your feed, and I'm like, oh, sounds interesting. Oh, that, and then like 20 minutes later, I'm like, where did what did I just do? Like that's still like a big distraction, but it's great that Twitter moves a little bit more to freedom of speech, a little bit more to sovereignty, which forces also the other bigger platforms. And then we have also Nostra, so we have those exit valves. I think that's a great trend towards those kind of things. I love that a lot. Yeah, perfect. Then one question that I asked each and every one of my guests is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
Bitcoin is a tool. It is a tool for you to make sure that your time is respected, your time that you put into work is respected, and that you don't lose the value of that time that you put into work so that you can spend it on things that make your life easier and happier. But at the end of the day, it is just a tool. The most important thing about life is your time and and how you spend your time. You may want to spend it with family. I was going to say family is important to me, right? But other people they love their friends. They love to be alone. Spend it how you want it. Time is the most precious thing. It's the resource that we have the least of, and every day we have even less, and we really don't even know how much we have. I think I have another 60 years, but I really don't know. I could just have another 5 minutes, right? So Bitcoin is just a tool that helps you respect your time and so don't go chasing after money. Don't go chasing after Bitcoin. Go chasing after the things that make you happy, and Bitcoin is just a tool to do that.
I love that a lot. Really cool. We have entered in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And your question from the previous guest is an interesting one. What G7 nation will be the first one to print money to buy Bitcoin officially?
Oh, that is a really good one because, like, I'm actually surprised nobody has done that yet, right? um, I'm going to say that Japan.
Amazing. I just put it up on the screen because maybe people don't know who are G7 nations. G7 nation includes Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And I think the EU is always also with them in the meeting as a no. So like the EU is not like an official member of the G7, but EU is kind of like in those meetings, I think. So
Yeah.
Japan is an interesting choice. It's hard to choose from here, but yeah, Japan is an interesting one. Uh, I,
Uh,
yeah. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, I have a rationale for that is, and they're printing so much money anyway, so what? Who cares? Let's just print more money to save ourselves, right?
I loved how Cynthia Lummis is framing the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve Bill, because she's framing it to, hey America, let's buy Bitcoin to pay off a little bit of debt later on with
Yeah.
that. That's a genius, because it's really hard to argue against that. So yeah, that's funny. But yeah, like really like going ahead and printing their own currency and buying Bitcoin. I mean, they have to do it kind of like people don't get it that they actually do it, because once it's out that like a nation is actually printing their own currency just to buy Bitcoin, the whole trust in the currency is lost.
Oh yeah. But I would say this: if you were gonna do it, take El Salvador's approach of DCAing 1 Bitcoin per day. So then you're only printing over, probably won't get away with this for long, but you're only printing a little bit every day to achieve that goal. Now, El Salvador can't do that because they don't have their own currency, and they have no ability to print more USD. But Japan can. So you're welcome, Japan. You're welcome. So
Let's see. Let's come back in 10 years on this podcast and see who was actually first. But yeah, Japan is an interesting
yeah.
choice. Really cool. Thank you so much. Jaime, it is, right?
Yes, Jaime. Yeah.
Jaime.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because my German wants to say Jaime.
Yeah. Well, and have a great time in El Salvador. I won't be there for adopting this year, but many of my friends will, and you will enjoy the country. I guarantee you. Befriend the people and indulge in the food when you can. I know that a lot of us Bitcoiners are quite disciplined in things that we eat, but it's okay to indulge every once in a while.
Really cool. Thank you so much. I will definitely do that. And I'm like I cook almost every day, kind of the same thing, and it's very boring. But I love good food, and I love trying new things out. That's why I'm not that strict with diet. So like I don't have a lot of meat in my diet, to be honest, and I just like to try out new things. Like if I see something on the menu that I cannot even pronounce, I probably take that, because I
Yeah.
just want to find out what the heck this is. So in my home kitchen, that's like almost the same thing every day. But once I get out and once I go on menus, I'm like, okay, what of those things I don't understand, or I'm like, what is that even? That I probably take. So I will try to get like, okay, what's the what's El Salvadorian food, and what can I eat there? So
Well,
I'm really
the
looking forward to that.
the famous one is pupusas, which is basically like a flat corn tortilla. So like a cornbread, and in the middle it's filled in with usually chicharron, which is basically fried pork. But if you want a vegetarian option, or not a vegetarian option, but like a non-meat option, like you can fill it with cheese, and then they have vegetable ones too. So and you can get a mixed one with, or yeah, another vegetarian option is a beans one. So, and there the mixed one has everything in it: vegetables, beans, cheese, chicharron. You can even get fish and chicken ones, which I'm not a big fan of myself personally, but a lot of people like them. The one
Uh,
thing though, if you want, if you want treats, uh, yuca, or yucca, it's like a cassava, like a root. Fried yuca is like amazing. So it's just like a street treat. Street vendors sell it. So maybe don't try it on the first couple days. Let your stomach bacteria kind of like adjust to the country, and then go for it. So
I will try my best to get the full El Salvadorian experience. I booked like a full week of events. I made the first day actually without events. I'm like the first day is
perfect.
I will probably sleep a lot because it's a long flight, and then I would just like stroll around the city and take it very slow. And then on the first day, I think in the evening, there's like a
Primer Bitcoin
yeah,
with
what is it?
John.
Yeah, the graduation, I think it is.
Oh,
So
perfect.
I think that's the first event I go to, and then like there's every day a lot of events
Yeah.
till I fly back. So I'm really looking forward to that. This podcast actually will come out like once it's already done.
That's
But
fine.
I'm really looking forward to it.
If you do get a chance, go to the historic center in San Salvador downtown. It's amazing. It's a party there all the time. It's very lit up, and yeah, there's like some colonial style buildings. It's very nice. But the beaches are amazing. I'm sure you'll go to Bitcoin Beach too. Say hi to Chimbera and all the buddies over there. So yeah, and Berlin, you gotta go to Berlin, man. Like maybe there'd be some German speaking people. Perhaps not Austrian German, but so
Perfect. Yeah. Looking forward to that. Perfect. And yeah, thank you so much. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, reach out to you?
yeah. So I've been keeping a low profile lately, just but I do write articles in Bitcoin Magazine every once in a while specifically about El Salvador. So you can check me out, Jaime Garcia. And if you search it in Bitcoin Magazine, I also have a Twitter handle, Jaime W Garcia, and I do. It's less busy than it used to be there, but if you want to contact me, ask me, my DMs are open, and so as long as you're not a shitcoiner and not a scammer, I'm happy to engage with anybody. So.
Thank you so much, Jaime, for being on the show. Thank you so much also for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.